go ahead and get started. Just a sec. Okay, we're going to talk about the principles of landscape design. That's um, a, a very important component of putting landscapes together. We have various titles. You hear a landscape architect and a landscape designer. They say, what's the difference? Well, landscape architect goes through formal training at the university. It usually takes 5 years. It's a lot analogous to conventional architecture, or that they teach at Georgia Tech. I know a couple of people have gone through the program there, as well as the program the University of Georgia has one, and they learn architecture, engineering, and all that fun stuff. And they used to, well, they're doing better. They used to not be too good with plant material, but they're doing that better these days. And then they want to practice. It's like a practice. They have to get a license to do that in the state of Georgia, or most states it's like that. Landscape designers, that's different. They just focus mainly on landscape design. They don't get into the engineering, architecture, little or none of that. Training for that can be very simple, like I know Gwinnett Tech, they've had some classes over there. I know Emory, their continuing education, or even at Emory, they have a program that they offer, landscape design. I'd love to take it if I had the time, but you know how that goes. So if anybody's interested, check out Emory Continuing Education. But in landscape design, you don't need to have all that, very minimal training, but it still takes some experience. And a landscape contractor is somebody who does the installations, maintenance, landscape plants and design. There's like design, build, and there's a maintenance. Some landscape contractors have designers and architects. It varies amongst them. And so that's just basically kind of put it in a nutshell. Landscape architects that are actually registered, they do a lot of things. I mean, not just landscape designs. I mean, they work with planning and development. I think we got a couple here in Gwinnett, our planning and development people are over there. So it's a whole bunch of things. Well, anyhow, we're just going to focus on very simple designs. I can assure you we're not going to have any intense architecture or engineering, because I went to University of Georgia, not Georgia Tech. All right. I'm going to have to play with this a little bit. Sometimes it gets a little difficult. All right. There is the principles of landscape design. There are many landscape books that discuss the principle of design and how these elements are brought together to create a pleasing landscape, unified and orderly. To achieve good landscape design, we need to have a thorough understanding of these principles. And what we're going to do is provide some presentation. The presentation, we're going to just go over some of these real basic principles of landscape design. You can see this is right here is a landscape, just very simple. This is you see those containers used. You got the formal kind of a little bit on the formal look in there. The hedges, they're trimmed a little at different heights. I'm not sure if those are hollies or boxwoods or what they are. I can't really tell. It's kind of a fine texture. First of all, I wouldn't recommend boxwoods because of that blight. That's just a little off the subject, but this was taken some years ago. You see the use of perennials and other plants and stonework, the hardscapes. So you hear that term used a lot. Landscape companies will focus on doing your hardscaping and things like that. Concept of landscape design: unity, order, scale and proportion, balance and rhythm. Those are the basic things that make a landscape and pull it together. Unity is how well the entire landscape design comes together to form one landscape. All aspects of a landscape should complement one another, they compete for one another. Unity can be achieved in many ways, but the most common is repetition. Repetition will be discussed in more detail later. Another way to achieve unity is through dominance, meaning that we have a dominant plant or group of plants that tend to hold the planting together. All elements tied together with each contributing to the total plan. This plan view drawings two groupings of plant. One on the left shows a grouping with one. There's one on the left as a plant grouping with no dominant plant. One on the right has a dominant plant. Colors and textures should support each other. They should all blend together and be part of the whole. Now, if you look at this, you can see this crepe myrtle is the dominant feature of this landscape. You know, that's sort of a matter of taste of what people want, but that's kind of a little too dominating in that picture there. Being up too close to the house, it should be a little further away from the house. This is a common yard, front yard. This is very simple, but yet you can show. This is the ground cover that you see, or you see the grass there, which maybe I think is zoysia, kind of hard to tell, but I know that the ground cover is Asiatic, or it's jasmine. That's a vine, but it can also be used as a ground cover. It is same with its close relative, the Confederate jasmine. It grows on. It produces very fragrant white flowers during the summer, or early the spring and early summer. And you can see this landscape, how easy it is to maintain. Very simple. And that's what we're trying to do, is to keep things as simple as possible. Order is the simple way things are arranged in the landscape. You know, these drawings using common geometric shapes illustrate to show this. One on the left is very disordered. There's no order or organization, and the one on the right is organized. It has order. So that's, you know, we're just thinking about the way things are being, now everyone is seeking some type of order in the landscape. I've seen too many landscapes where everything's just jumbled in and overplanted and there's no order, nothing. All right, these are the ones showing the same concept using plants. The front, these are showing using the concepts using plants. Sorry, I was kind of confused there for a second. This is a front yard. Though simple and small, has plants arranged. It's just a yard that everything, you don't really see much of anything here. Just some plants thrown in, and it's individual trees stand alone, and they're not arranged in any pattern. Residential landscapes, we talk about human scale and desire to make the space feel comfortable. You can see in this drawing right here, these the plants are too small for the house on the left based on proportion, scale and proportion. I apologize. I was a little. I was trying to stay on cue here for a minute. Scale and proportion, the plants too small for the house on the left, and the plants that are too large for the house. As you can see, the plants that look out of this is just planted, newly planted. Yes, it looks like the house is too big and the plants are too small. However, you have to take in considerations that the plants will grow and get larger. So in time, they will fill in and match the proportions of the house. Take a look at this. Now, I'll take a look at those Leyland cypress trees. It's not really a good place to put them because they most certainly will grow too large for this entrance and be out of scale of the entrance. Leland cypress trees are some of the most improperly used plants that I can think of, and I think a lot of you know why. One tree I would recommend you avoid, period, but especially in a location like this because they have a potential to reach 50 to 60 feet tall and 15 to 20 feet wide. And I don't think you want to have this your front of your home, your front door with that in front of it. Balance is a relationship between the elements in the landscape. It can be formal or informal. Now, on the right, a formal balance means one side of the landscape is a mirror of the other side, symmetrical, symmetry. Informal is asymmetrical. One side doesn't, it numbers are relatively similar on both sides, but they're not a mirror of each other. Balance through symmetry. A symmetrical layout where land can be drawn through the center. Each side is essentially the same. In this plan, the axis of symmetry runs in two directions. So you see, going from the right to the left, that's an asymmetrical. That's asymmetrical. We're going up and down. It's also asymmetrical symmetry. But you're looking at there are two axes of symmetries there. Take a look at this. This is technically asymmetrical because there's this tree, a pecan tree on the right. But if you forget about the pecan tree and just look at all the other plantings, it's pretty much symmetrical. Be honest with you, you're talking about choice of plants. I don't think that's a good place for a pecan because you know how they drop leaves and pecans on a sidewalk and walkway. I wouldn't recommend having a pecan tree there. I mean, I collect pecans, but that could potentially be a safety hazard as well. So, I'll take those things into consideration. This is symmetry. It's very close. The symmetrical balance creates a formal landscape entrance. It's right around the home, with a little variation further out, but it gets a little asymmetrical further out. But as you walk up to the door, you can see the symmetry there in balance. Rhythm in the landscape creates a sense of movement and has a lot to do with how plants or landscape elements are arranged. Sequence is a term often used along with rhythm. Landscape with sequence has one element changing at a time rather than several changing at once. These drawings illustrate a plan view drawing an elevation drawing a plant that moves from smaller plants to the on the right to the larger plants on the left. It creates a sense of rhythm. And you can see basically on the left is it as a top view of it, like you would see on a plant, and the bottom is a section view, is what you would look like if you actually were looking at it from in front of it. So you're kind of getting to look at what your landscape, and that's important to think about. What is it ultimately going to look like to have that rhythm? You want to kind of have a smooth flow. This is a rhythm plan view. You have an example of a good sequencing in both view and what is termed here. Elevation view is actually the formal term. Sequence arrangements of plants start slow and builds into the height of the feature plant. That's the design right there, which each little dot represents a individual plant. Here's a rhythm sequence view, and you can see how the plants all blend into the landscape. This fence has a triangle pattern that alternates between upright and inverted. It creates a rhythm in the landscape. You can see where that's a pretty smooth flow there. Application of design principles Basic principles can be expressed in various ways, but no discussion of design is complete without proper discussion of the underlying concepts of line, repetition, simplicity, harmony, and variety. We will be looking at how to achieve unity, order, proportion, balance, and rhythm of the components. So line, repetition, simplicity, harmony, and variety. Take a look at what you're seeing out there. That's a symmetrical design. A nice water feature. All right, one thing is the importance of line. Particular bed lines cannot be overstated. The shape of the lines around flower beds and shrubs, as well as individual trees, can beautify a design or make a design look sloppy. This is in front of the house, but I'll show you some more examples of bed lines in a couple of minutes. A lot of times people will edge the bed lines by chemicals. Well, I'll just put a little Roundup around the edge, and that doesn't work out. Is a common error. It could potentially ruin a good site design. These are some more designs. Bed lines should also blend in with the house, driveway, sidewalks, and slope. Experiments with various lines. A lot of times you could say, well, you can just use a hose or a rope and get some turf paint. You can buy those at garden centers and building supply stores, and just spray along the rope or the hose, and you got your bed line, and that kind of gives you, kind of helps you determine what you want. Lines are strong elements in the landscape. Straight and perfect circular lines can be formal or modern. Curved linear lines can be more natural or just poorly constructed straight lines. Straight lines should be straight, perfectly straight, and curved linear lines should not be flat. Curved lines and walls, walks, and beds will be weeping in nature and not too curvy. As you can see how it is in these. We're going back to hardscaping again. If you're having, just to let you know, if you're going to have walls built with bricks or stones or whatever like that, you need to make sure the people have the appropriate license, appropriate training and qualifications to do that, because the potential that if it's not put properly, you could have a washout or the wall could crash like a landslide. In some of these, it could potentially be a safety hazard. So just make sure that the landscapers, or you might get some references on making sure that this is something they're specialized and they know what they're doing and they have experience putting walls in for safety. Here's a real formal. This is an image of some examples of lines in the landscape. See how this formal look right here with the hardscaping? That's probably on some commercial or institution, because I can just look and see the stonework and design. That's a lot of money there that goes into that. Some of these hardscapings can get quite expensive. This is a serpentine brick edging, creates a more relaxed effect. You see that perennial bed there? I'll tell you where I think I know where this is the University of Georgia Founders Garden. That's on the North Campus, and it's been there forever. I can recognize that wall over there in front. That's Ficus pumila, or a creeping fig. And I remember when as an undergraduate in horticulture, I would go to that garden for plant ID classes under Mike Durr. I think most of y'all know who he is. So if you ever on that campus get a chance, it's a treat to go there. And that's just one little part of it. I'll show you a little bit some more about a formal boxwood garden that they have. This is a linear walkway. As you can see, the lines, it's very simple, but it has some order to it. Simple design. It doesn't have to be real fancy. you can see this zigzag walkway or a dock, essentially walkway. It could be a dock for all we know. It's kind of hard to tell in that picture. It be, people can go over there and walk or put a boat in, or kids can go up there and fish. But you see that zigzag pattern, that's a very attractive there. And some of these properties I'm going to show are from people with a fair amount of money. Just to kind of digress a little bit, the Urban Agriculture Council of Georgia, it's the landscape turf organization, nurseries. They have their landscape awards every year. They have several people they choose to judge it, professionals. I've been on their committee years ago a couple times, and they'll have categories for commercial and residential. Residentials for under $50,000, between $50,000 and $150,000, and residential for over $150,000 worth of landscaping. So there's definitely people with money out there that can buy these things. I don't know where they get it, but there's a lot of money, and some of these companies they're really put in some extraordinary landscapes. Well, it's a little ornamental fish pond, a small water garden. Robert Brandon, let's see about our former director, has something sort of like this in his yard. He likes water gardens. And he's given presentations on that in the past. Repetition is of shapes, patterns, and plants, even colors help unify the landscape. Repeat the same plant, color, and shrub form. You could also repeated use of curves is one subtle way to give it some continuity and repetition. Repeated use of right angles on a grid design, successfully used to achieve unity. Right angles may begin in the front yard, perhaps the sidewalks, and then be used in the bedlines, which go around the property and be repeated again in the backyard. So there's many ways to it. Now this is some fancy garden in Europe. I think it's in Scotland, or Britain somewhere, but I can't say exactly where. Mixing the concept of rhythm with power and strength of lines in the landscape cannot be underestimated. Lines draw the eye and can either make it or break a landscape. General straight lines represent formality, and curved lines represent informality. Nature gives us natural rhythms you can use in lines that meet flow, such as hills cresting on a skyline, or a river meeting the land's edge. You should be able, with your eye, to follow the lines flowing between use areas without drastic or abrupt changes. When repeating something a number of times with standard intervals between repetition, rhythm is formed. You can look at this where you see some repetition there with these plants. I don't know what kind of, we're going to ask me what kind of plants those are. It's some type of coniferous evergreen, and it's definitely something we couldn't grow here in Georgia. It's too hot. As you know, that's a slight difference. Britain has a different climate than we have. And I said, look, we mentioned in our weed lecture, and then that one I did on troubleshooting about making sure you have the right plant in the right places that adapted to our climate. That's something else to take into consideration when you're taking plant material along with the design. I mentioned this because in the landscape architecture, sometimes, and I'm not picking on landscape architects, but years ago I used to work with them and do landscape designs and install them, and I would look and says, what are they thinking? Why is this plant doesn't grow here in Georgia? I had situations like that and had to have a discussion with some people. Simplicity, KIS, keep it simple. Anything less is more. And you kind of say that's life in general, but that can be difficult sometimes. you know, what is important and what is not important. Details that will not have major impacts should not be used. Sometimes there's temptation to get too fancy or to use too many different plants, making it cluttered looking. And I've seen this a lot over the years. I know many of you too. In the landscape, I'd go and take landscape maintenance over on properties, and it's just a hodgepodge of. It's like a plants thrown together, and it's ridiculous. There is a place for embellishments such as sculptures, signs, windmills, but these items should be placed in the landscape carefully to avoid confusion. Simplicity is makes the user comfortable in the landscape setting. Let's make sure that you try to create a plan here that flows with the natural design of the landscape, and making it comfortable, park-like setting. And straight lines and borders may be used to help improve the maintenance or make maintenance easier. And that's another thing when you're designing, you got to think about maintenance. You know, a little while ago, I mentioned something about, oh, the pecan tree over the sidewalk. Well, some trees can be messy by nature. I know river birches, they're real bad about dropping leaves and branches, sycamores, and a few other things. So you have to think about, is this going to be a problem plant at this situation? Does a plant fit here? So I'll tell you what I really hate are those sweet gums dropping those sticky balls. I mean, I remember growing up, we had a friend of my dad's, and every time we go over there, his front yard, over the sidewalk in the driveway, there was this giant sweet gum tree, and you couldn't hardly walk with all those little sweet gum balls. Harmony. Continually ask, how will everything I am planning look together? How's it going to look together? How does it fit together? Will the blend create harmony or a jumble of ideas and elements? Plants, they should all fit, have a place in the landscape, fit together. And landscape. Variety, mix it up. You know, just a bunch of foundation, like a few hollies and boxwoods and azaleas, it gets kind of boring. I mean, it'll do. When selecting plants to be grouped in the same planting, create more variety by alternating colors, forms, and textures. You might want to put a purple plant with a glossy green plant. Alternate spreading plants and upright plants, and so forth. You know, smooth leaves next to spiny, small leaf plants that have a fine texture. We'll talk about that in just a minute about texture. There are plants in the landscape. There's many different plants to choose for the home landscape. Choosing the right ones, you require knowledge of the right plants for the climate, the right plants for the right plant for the site they're going to be put in, the plant characteristics, how big it will get, and I emphasize that's very important because you know, it's like that little plant today could be a big shrub or tree tomorrow. Think of like little kids. I mean, you know, I keep thinking about my oldest nephew. I remember holding him in my lap when he was an infant, and now he's like 6'4" and 220 pounds. So he's 24. So, you know, that's the same with plants. You got to think about what their ultimate size are and how big are they going to grow. Plant them spaced apart appropriately where they don't grow together. That's the problem I see with Leyland cypress trees. They grow too close together. They're planted too close together. We're going to look at color, texture, and form. Knowing these characteristics, you can mix and combine to achieve the principles of design. It's more difficult to create quality landscape designs without knowledge of hardy plant materials, their characteristics, and growth habits. Again, that's what we need. You need to learn about plants and keep reference material on hand when creating a landscape design. Plants in the landscape can be like bricks and or blocks in concrete. Yellow and blue work well, but daffodils are yellow and butterfly bushes can be blue, but they don't bloom at the same time. Daffodils bloom in early spring. Uh, Butterfly bushes bloom in the summer. Both are very attractive, but they're not going to complement each other since they bloom at different times. Um, again, we're showing all different colors. Having color in the landscape is beautiful. It with commonly expressed as flowers. But there can be um, you know uh, branches and twigs that have a attractive color. Like there's certain type of we think of dogwoods. There's a certain type of shrub like dogwoods, so different species, not the common dogwood, and they have beautiful red or yellow branches, and are quite attractive during the winter months when all the leaves have fallen down. Um, you can see these other plantings right here, like bark. This works well. Um, let's look. Now, one thing, if you look on the upper right there, you'll see the perennials with the hostas, but a lot of those annual plants. Annuals are give some of the most color, but they're also some of the most intensive to having to maintain. Again, I'm going back to the days when I worked in commercial landscaping and installing. We have to tear out the old beds like we tear the pansies out, what we doing now, and putting the summer flowers in, and then do vice versa in the winter months or in the fall. And that takes. I mean, that you can have annuals. Just realize you may put a little more work in, and commercial landscapers have special techniques. Um, I know some companies that specialize on just seasonal color, which is another term uh, for this. I know a fellow named Joe Burns down in Grayson who owns Color Burst. He's been around for a very long time, does that on commercial and residentials. And Jenny Hargrave out there in, I believe, in Mableton or Lithia Springs, somewhere like that, has Simply Flowers. And she has won some awards with that Urban Ag Council. So, but that's what they focus on strictly, and it's a nice little niche market that some people have. But it takes a lot of work and a lot of planning. So just be, when you're putting annuals, but that doesn't mean you can't use them. But just keep in mind, I have annual plantings. I always buy begonias, and marigolds look great in the summer, but those for some reason those pansies and I don't aren't getting along too well. I'll have to check my soil on that. Texture is important. Um, can be used for variety, helps create entrance and diversity in the landscape. Uh, Distinction between masses of plants. Well, I got two types. There's coarse texture. Um, you have the large rough leaves, red as a separate, even at a distance. And then you have fine texture, thin, narrow, small leaves, red as a blob at a distance. And a medium texture in some cases. I didn't have this up here, but that's sort of a mixture between the two. So that really plays in bark. You can see bark here. That plays a role in texture and adding interest to the landscape. We talked earlier about those shrub dogwoods. These are some bark. On the left is river birch, very attractive bark, but remember, you want it placed out of a way where it's not going to drop leaves and branches all over the place. It's going to be a problem. Not quite certain what that middle one is, but I suspect it's a devil's walking stick, Aurelia spinosa, which is sort of a weedy tree. Not really one I would use in the landscape. On the right looks like lace bark elm, really nice elm that grows in our area, good hardy tree. So that bark can have bark can bring texture into the landscape. Plant form, the outline of plant created is as well as its any 3D feature, excuse me, 3D features it produces. Um, it can be columnar, round, vase, weeping, oval. Should be considered early in the design process. Often a plant can be sheared or attached to a wall to create this effect. However, extra maintenance should be and it requires extra maintenance and should be considered only in special situations. So, you really don't want to have to plant something and have to constantly be shearing or pruning it um, all the time, unless it's something really special. Now, you see on the left here is what we call a spalliate. A lot of plants are espaliered. I've seen apple trees espaliered, magnolia trees, and a variety of things. Middle, we got our desert plants, which is, now they don't, if they're in a site where they're happy, they don't require too much work. They kind of care for themselves. And on the right there, it looks like we have some Japanese magnolias around a water garden. Japanese magnolias, I've recently had a couple questions about those. Those are really, they're nice specimen plants in the landscape. Just before, there's many different, probably hundreds of varieties, and some of them can be quite pricey. But then again, on those fancy landscape designs at some of these upscale places, that's nothing but chump change to them. There's some tree forms. You see different types of tree forms. So many trees do not develop their true form until they're close to maturity in their growth stage. Think of ginkgo trees. Ginkgos, they produce that beautiful yellow golden foliage in the fall. Only thing is they're male and female plants. And female plants produce fruit that's has a very offensive odor. I know a long time ago they had planted some of these trees on the streets down in Athens, Georgia, and they obviously didn't take that into consideration. Once they started dropping those fruits, they had too many complaints, so they had to cut the trees down. Now, if you're ever on the Athens campus, one place you can see is anyhow, you see these different trees right here, different forms, like those conical, a lot of those coniferous evergreens have those kind of a conical form. Also know that a lot of them, like spruces and firs, don't grow real well down here. It's more north. And they have you see these other forms in the landscape. And you can even think about, if they're deciduous, what do they look like in the winter months when they lose their leaves, like the one on the bottom left. This is interesting. These are three different forms of the same plant species. Yopon hollies, Ilex vomitoria. On the left, you can see a tree form of it. That's that big one right up there left. And then a miniature dwarf form of it, which is used as a shrub. And on the right, a weeping form, the pendula, Ilex vomitoria pendula. So there's the same plant, but three different forms of it. So there's things, you can see how plants can vary a great degree. If you have them, these are actually really good plants to have in the landscape because they need to have full sun. But if they have full sun and decent drainage soil, they will thrive. You see a lot of them down along the coast and beaches because they can handle salt water and salt air and things like that. Plants in the landscape design. Several considerations when placing them in the landscape. Plant arrangement and massing are very important. The selection of accent plants is also important. Can make a simple plant, too many of them can make it look messy looking. Draw the attention. The maintenance point of view, plant spacing will affect the vigor of the plant and the feature. So, we talk about plant uh, spacing. That's important. Okay, hollies are planted in a straight line across the front of the foundation of this house. In this case, the planting is plain, the lines are simple, and those of the house, follow those of the house instead of creating a form that relates to the house. Yet it is different. You can see, and eventually they'll grow and get larger. Now you'll have to take into consideration that they'll grow up and cover some of those windows, and some people don't like that. This is a formal garden, not around here anywhere. Clipped boxwoods and yews form an formal English garden, create a more formal effect while remaining interesting. You see that, very attractive. Here are two different types of lantana. Lantana is really a good plant for our area. It's considered perennial further south and an annual up here, but this you got right here, Miss Huff is that yellow, and the new gold are the bigger ones. The Miss Huff grows, it supposedly can survive through our winter. And that's interesting. I'm going to go plant some of those in my garden. Easy to grow once they get maintained, once they get established. How about these masses of ornamental grasses? This is at the University of Georgia entrance over there off College Station Road near the bypass. Anybody that's familiar with the area? Pink muley grass is one growing below there, and then there's switchgrass. Let's see, growing on top. Ornamental grasses are very attractive. They produce a fine texture in the landscape, and also from a maintenance point of view, provided they need to have full or mostly full sun and decent drainage. But they're pretty tough in the landscape and need very little maintenance. They don't have a lot of pest problems. A lot of times people toward the end of the winter will cut them back to the ground to allow new foliage to come out. But those are really a win for the landscape. We think about land, we have to think about maintenance. Here is Blue Atlas cedar, a specimen plant. It stands alone in the landscapes, provides specific seasonal interest or color. More than one or two special trees or shrubs can reduce the value of using a specimen, and a situation where none of these would be considered. So you see that you have a couple of those Blue Atlas cedars, and but if you had a whole mass of them, they wouldn't really stand out as specimens. Here's a Japanese maple. An excellent specimen plant in the landscape, as you can see it. That's a weeping, they call a form of it. I would say that one right there is a. All right. They're sure that one right there costs some money to put in the landscape. That's another thing. We mentioned about cost. Let's remember things cost. How much. This plant is filled with specimens, kind of crowded. Too many plants, all there packed together, so it kind of loses its form. This is another one in front of a building. It looks like we have a Burford holly in front, two Yopons on the right and left side, and I believe that's a sweet peg magnolia. On that little island there, that's not an appropriate use. What would really be better is have the sweet bay magnolia alone and some lyre oak planted, or just have one of those types of hollies alone, because that's getting too compacted there. You can look at this right here. Japanese maples and flower beds all work together to kind of make a specimen plant. You can see the accents provide interest to the season through they have specific forms, textures, and color. Use an unusual plant or feature to serve as focus for the eye. The accents in walks or beds are, you can see the straight lines, kind of like straight line look. It really fills in nicely there. Very attractive landscape, somewhat symmetrical. Japanese maples, those are a different form that grow up pretty large. You see the container plant, the kind of accent, and all kind of drawing the eye to the entrance of that house there. What makes a landscape design look good? Personal taste, for one thing. Now you look at this this house right here. It looks like one of them little houses that they sell things on, gift shops up there along in North Georgia. Now that kind of maybe to us looks kind of may not look what we would want, but whoever owns that house, to them that's their personal taste. That is creative. Personal experiences. What kind of experience? You know, what have you? Plan arrangement and knowledge. Simple design principles. All that takes into consideration. Blending plants together in the landscape requires both a knowledge of plants and how they will perform. Where do you begin? Well, there are several ways. This is some formal garden over in Britain. I forgot what it was called. You could research books and magazines, internet, go on the internet and do research. Observation, neighbors. How are your neighbors' gardens designed? Parks and public gardens, botanical gardens. You know, we got the Atlanta Botanical Garden. We got Vines Garden Park. A variety of places around here you can take a look. Many different beautiful designs, and you know, a lot of it just comes down to what you want, or what whoever you're doing the design wants. It's just like when you're doing decorating in your home, you have a personal taste. Now each person's is different. You know, I may put a design in my yard that will look a lot different than someone else's. It just depends on a lot of things. Do your homework, site analysis. Look at the site. Take a look at the site. I mean, you know the sun, know the shade areas, check the drainage, personal needs. I mean, you know, supposing you have children and they may turn your lawn into a soccer field. That's what me and my brother did, and we turned our lawn into a muddy soccer field, and that has to be taken into consideration. Individual taste, combine all of the above. It all starts with an idea, and you build on that. Visit local nurseries and gardens to get fresh ideas. Look at gardens. I mean, yeah, Home Depot and Lowe's have stuff, but look at a little more special nurseries. I'll put a plug in for a Family Tree down in Grayson, Randy's Nursery in Lawrenceville. This is in Gwinnett. I'm sure DeKalb and Cobb have similar type of garden centers over there that you can look at and get ideas. Doing that, so it starts an idea, you know. Impact of design on maintenance. Again, let's think about maintenance. I know these are, they look like ironwood trees or hawthorn bean trees pruned in this hedge-like. Well, that's a very formal. And, you know, you have to think about the maintenance. So this would take a lot of maintenance. For those of us who have been Disney World, you know, they do what topiaries of trees and shrubs, you know, they look like Mickey Mouse and other Disney characters. That's a lot of work to do that. So, you know, that's ultra high maintenance. You may not want to do that. In fact, I don't think most of us, you know, think about turf grass areas. You know, turf grass is nice, but you try to limit that a little bit. You know, don't overuse turf grasses. because they are demand, they have to have certain maintenance requirements. Maybe you got an area that's kind of shady. Um, think about, well, I can't get turf grass to grow. Think about some alternatives. So just take a look. Plant spacing, leave plenty of room, space the plant properly. The 75% rule. Space plants at a spacing that is approximately 75% of their mature growth. Or take a look at this right here. These are two landscapes at a different time. This is as it was being landscaped, and that's what it on the left, and that's what it looked like 7 years later. I think they, from these pictures, they may have overdone it a little bit. The plants are kind of growing. You can see where they're growing over the sidewalk and walking. A little too excessive use of plants. Remember, more doesn't necessarily mean better. Again, we'll talk about turf is a great unifier for play areas, used to lighten up darker areas. Um, there's a lot of things about turf, but turf, again, there's certain maintenance. And of course, this is formal. It looks like a golf course, maybe more. Remember, grass needs to be mowed, edged in a lot of cases, eliminate or reduce small beds. You see there in the middle where that mulch is circles put around the tree, that keeps it from getting lawnmower disease, as we call it in the industry, where people crash their lawnmowers into it. Of course, that didn't always stop them, but it's a sort of it discourages damage. Edging treatments, all that taken into consideration. They don't have to be big to be an impact. Here we go again. The simple, we're going back to this design that I showed you earlier with the Asiatic jasmine. You see that grass, zoysia grass? It's kind of, I think that's what it is, but from this angle, it's a little closer angle. It almost looks like St. Augustine. Well, that would be great. St. Augustine can tolerate shade. See how simple? That's just a little brief turf grass area. The other plants come together. They form a nice, easy to maintain design. Follow standards, walks and driveways, driveway turnaround, retaining wall. Again, we talked about retaining wall constructions. There's a lot of standards that you to make sure somebody's experienced drainage systems like French drains can be put in. You need to make sure that the whoever's doing it's experienced. Think about playing with shapes in the landscape and relationships. Focus on the space first and plants later. Start a plan with a specific plant to locate in the landscape. Can hinder process. Doesn't mean you can't put your favorite plants in there, but look, there may be other possibility. The initial plan may kind of look something like this. The larger trees and shrubs are represented with the big circles and smaller ones with the smaller circles. By applying principles we discussed, it's possible to draw a residential landscape plan. But it requires basic plant knowledge. Now here we got a landscape. This is tall fescue grass. And this is something you have to take a look at some things in consideration. Tall fescue grass is a nice grass, but that's a cool season grass. It will stress out during the warm weather months. And you will have to take that into consideration. Also, you see that soccer goal. It's another picture, sort of a nice entrance. Here's a form. This is that University of Georgia landscape founder's garden, and you see a formal boxwood design. I'm not sure if that's still there with the boxwood blight. I think they probably are putting the fungicides to it. And that's a yard there, very simple, nice view. And there's my contact information. and I will open the floor up for questions. Lisa, read me the questions.
So I have one that says, could you please repeat and or explain the 75% rule?
Okay. The 75% rule. This is to help reduce base plants at a spacing that is 75% of their mature width. So let's say their mature width is 20 feet apart. That are 20. That is approximately 75% of that. They grow to be 20 feet in width. Space them at roughly 15 feet apart. What they're saying. Any other questions?
I don't have anything yet, but I wrote down if anybody has any to go ahead and type them or ask. So maybe just wait a second.
We'll wait a minute, and then we'll take a break, and then we'll go into water-wise landscaping. Well, I guess that's inspiring everybody to go out and get their landscapes designed and do their spring plantings. I know I am. Ready for nice weather. Got some nice weather. Spring is upon us. At least that's something we can rejoice in. You can work in your gardens. That's one thing we can do with all the stuff going on. So I'm going to go ahead and we'll take, let's see, we'll come back at 2:15 and go in the next section, okay? All right, well, I'll see you then. We're going to talk about water conservation, developing water-wise landscaping. Though we've had a lot of rain recently, we've had droughts in the past that have affected this area. I can think back to 2007, 2008. Early in my extension career, we had a pretty bad drought. It was really bad, and they were trying to control water and put restrictions, and they were saying no outdoor watering for landscaping or anything like that. And there was a lot of controversy about that. Again, this Urban Ag Council that I was telling you about, they helped work with the DNR and the Department of Natural Resources and the Georgia Environmental Protection Division to allow where green industry, the landscape turf nursery homeowners could use the water outdoor plants, because a lot of them it was targeted because that was the first, you can see a lawn being watered. You can see that, or as opposed to some poultry plant. I'm not picking on the poultry people, but they use a tremendous amount of water, and they weren't not restrictions, so it kind of evened things out and makes it a little better. Well, of course it looks, but as I said, right now we seem to have plenty of rain. We got more coming in tomorrow. Some of it could be severe, so hold on to your seat. So anyhow, let's look at getting ornery with me again. All right. Well, I'd hate to be the surfer in that water, wouldn't y'all? That shark. 90% of the Earth's water is salt water, the ocean. 2%, 97%, 2% is tied up in ice, the glaciers, the polar ice caps, and so forth. That means that only 1% of it is usable fresh water. Freshwater lakes, freshwater rivers, groundwater resources. And of course, we ain't doing a good job of conserving that, dumping, polluting it. I know today is our Earth Day, and over the past 50 years, 50th anniversary, we've done there's a lot better job of protecting our water bodies, but still there's a lot that needs to be done, especially, and even more so in other countries. All right, a lawn sprinkler. Learning when to, we can save water by learning when to water, how much to apply, and most efficient way. A single oscillating lawn sprinkler like the one shown here will typically use 6 gallons of water per minute or 360 gallons per hour. Look at this. Using 360 gallons of water is equivalent to 15 5-minute showers, 26 runs of the dishwasher, 72 flushes of the toilet, 9 full loads of laundry. So that's a lot of water. Maybe we can find ways to reduce that water usage. So we're going to talk about 7 steps to a water-wise landscaping. There's a term for this, xeriscaping. That's Xerica, excuse me, Xeriscaping, xeriscaping, minimal use water. And it consists of these 7 components: planning and design, soil analysis, appropriate plant selection, practical turf areas, and efficient use of mulch, appropriate use of mulches. Planning and design, we take a look at that. Examine how these 7 steps starts with planning and design. These are natural areas. Some areas you really don't need to do much. That doesn't need much water. Nature provides the water that these natural areas need. So you don't take that into consideration. You don't have to have ornamental plants everywhere. Take a look at the site analysis. Know what your site, where the shade is. Some areas like around paved areas, there's glare off pavement. Look at the topography, the views, proximity to neighbors, and so forth. And some areas, or like you have you may have your front area and your private area out back, and an area like you keep your garbage can, your service area. Divide the landscape into 3 water use zones: high water usage, or oasis zone, moderate water use, or transition zone, or low water use, or xeric zone, where we get xeriscaping, means less water. There may be several of each of these zones in an individual landscape. All right, high water use zone, the oasis zone, small high impact or high visibility areas where plants are provided at their optimal water requirements at all times. We try to limit this, maybe entrances to homes or businesses, or like some of those annual plants I was telling you need a lot of water. So entrances to office parks and things like that, but you limit to where that's used. Transition zone. Plants that are watered during establishment, then once established, they are watered only when they show signs of stress. A lot of our ornamental trees and shrubs, like azaleas, dogwoods, redbuds, a lot of these herbaceous perennials as well, can be used. The hollies, these plants, once they get established, you really don't need a lot of supplemental water, except during really dry periods. And then we actually, this is more so low water use zone. Once established, these plants are provided no supplemental irrigation except extreme drought. And we mentioned the junipers, which I would prefer not to have any in the landscape, just personal opinion. Crepe myrtles, those are good plants to have. Yopon hollies, oaks, and just the native areas. Ideally, 10% of the landscape is irrigated regularly. 30% is irrigated on demand, and 60% is not irrigated. That's we'll just turn that word as oasis landscaping. Okay, all right. So let's say you want to use this seasonal color, just put them in containers. So you just have to periodically water the containers, but everything else doesn't need as much. We're going to have a little, this is a typical Georgia residence, okay? This house, we got a good combination of foundation shrubs, azaleas planted on the east side of the, where they get morning sun and afternoon shade. We got Fatsia used at the front door as an accent plant. Magnolia is used as to soften the corner, a little gem magnolia. Spirea, which is a spring flowering white flowers shrub along the north side, and some native trees and the remainder. See all this turf grass. This is what you have right here. Um, this is the high water use zone, low and moderate. It's mostly high water, and we want to change that. So let's do some changes here. So we change it, and we retrofit it, and you can see right here we got what we have as high water use zone. So we got rid of some of the turf and put some beds in, pine straw with some ornamental grasses, the perennials over there in that blue area on the left. This is what we have now. You only have the high water use zone as the turf grass and that those annual beds. But we can go to a step further. Put the hybrid Bermuda. Hybrid Bermuda, or Bermuda in general, needs a lot less water than, that's probably the most drought tolerant turf grass out there. Whereas I mentioned earlier, tall fescue needs a lot more water during the summer months. There you go. We've reduced that down to only high water use zone is where those annuals are. So take a look at this right here. Shade gardening, also in shady areas, that has a little less water use. That's tall fescue. It can handle the filter shade. You see some shade-loving plants like those hostas there. Obviously, the deer haven't feasted on them yet. That's the only drawback to hostas. The deers like to have them for dinner. Also, the next step is soil analysis. Know your soil. Soil tests. Extension, we offer soil tests and collecting the soil that that's been discussed in a previous lecture. Organic, mixing organic matter in the soil really helps. It helps by improving their water and nutrient holding capacity, improves the structure of hard compacted soil. How much, it says ideally, if you're going to put 25% by volumes, you put 3 inches on top of the soil and incorporate it to a 12-inch depth. Now this is like if you're putting like flower beds in and vegetables and things like that. Trees and shrubs do not need to have all this organic matter. In fact, we discourage use organic matter. If you're going to plant a tree or shrub, dig the hole 2 to 3 times the width of the root ball and no deeper than the top of the root ball, and just refill that regular soil that's there. You do not need to add organic matter because the regular soil will be satisfactory enough. Because if you got a lot of those organic amendments, it can interfere with their root growth. Turf grasses, you can mix organic soil matter in. That's sort of a matter of choice. Anyhow, you want to use, all right, you see on the right is the decomposed. That's what needs to be used. It's composted, not the one on the left. If you put fresh wood chips and mix it in the soil microbes will take nutrients out of the soil to break it down. We're on the right, it's already been broken down. You can use wood chips as mulch, but don't incorporate it into the soil. There we go. We showed incorporating how it's incorporated into the soil or incorporating organic matter. Now, it is fine if you're going to plant individual trees and shrubs. If you want to till up that whole area, where let's say you're going to put 10 Yopon hollies in an area, you till it up and add organic matter to the whole area, it's fine. You just want to do it to individual holes. Do something called the perk test. Especially you want to check our drainage. You know, I've talked about in the past that presentational troubleshooting landscape that more plants are killed in Georgia from overwatering than from drought. Too much water. Dig a hole 2 to 3 feet wide and about 18 to a foot to 18-inch deep. Uh, if you still have water remaining in there within 2 hours, then you have a drainage problem. You should add amendments or try to break it up. Appropriate plant selection. Again, we go back to this using the right plant for the right place. Plants don't save water, people save water by your choice of plant material and where you put them. You need to select plants adapted to the site and stresses of the environment. Drought tolerance is important, but also consider potential insects, disease problems, sunlight, and soil requirements. Take all that into consideration. We talked about some plants that are, let's say like you have Kentucky bluegrass. Kentucky bluegrass is very attractive, but it's a little too far south for us to grow it. When I took a trip to Fort Wayne, Indiana last year for our national meeting, Ag Agents meeting, they grew it like it grows just fine up there, but not so well down south. Consequently, St. Augustine grass, pretty looking, attractive grass, but sometimes our cold weather, if it gets real cold, it can get damaged. So, think about that. Some plants have serious, well, some plants have a lot of insect problems and disease problems, like, the red tip photinias. They got those leaf spot disease that cause a lot of them to die. Same thing gets on Indian hawthorns. Those are the things you want to avoid using. Roses in shade, that's not going to work. As you can tell, they can't live and they need to have full sun or mostly full sun. So that needs to be gone. It looks like I see some junipers growing and they're on their way out as well. They need to have full sun. Manhattan euonymus, that's a nice for shadier areas, but in full sun, you can see on the bottom right, they die out. So it's not good for them. You think about shade-loving plants. There's azaleas, hostas, and this Japanese pachysandra. They can tolerate the shade. Azaleas they need to have some, or they'll suffer. Azaleas, if you have them out in full sun, they're more likely to get lace bugs that disfigure their leaves. Now below you have liriope and mondo grass. Mondo grass is related to liriope, but it's a small and slow growing. You don't want to cut that back in the winter, late winter, like you do to liriope. These can also grow in the sun as well. See this shady area? You got well-adapted plants. The Japanese maples, they can handle some shade. You got what looks like maybe some mondo grass and some begonias, looking pretty good. Here are some plants that can tolerate shade. Shade, there's some like azaleas, hostas, as we were talking about, and also some shrubs here. Spirea, mahonia, dwarf hollies, but I would recommend it against planting. Excuse me, I was looking at I got the wrong slide here. Shade, azaleas, hostas, and pachysandra grow great. Barbellias and camellia do great in shade. These Japanese akubas, they can grow pretty tall. They're great, but they can handle full shade. They're nice screening plants as well, but if you have them out in the full sun, they suffer. Spirea can handle some shade. Same with the Abelias, the Leucothae. That's another plant that does well in shade. So these are your sun-loving plants. This was where it's talking about plants that do well in the sun, like zebra grass, sun coleus, uh, Mexican heather, purple heart, purple passion does well. Also, you have spirea, dwarf hollies do great, that do well in the full sun. Here's some more. These are some trees right here. The little gem magnolias. It's like the big big leaf magnolias, but these are dwarf versions of it. Chinese pistache trees. They have pinnated leaves. They're right and beautiful fall color. Underutilized. Y'all go to that CarMax up in Norcross, you'll see some planted hollies. The Japanese Zelkova tree, related to elms, that has sort of an attractive vase shape, grows great along street plantings. This chast tree, or vitex, grows great, has very few pests, doesn't have any real pest problems. Lace bark elms. The Trident maple is sort of a low-growing maple with teardrop-shaped leaves, and the crepe myrtles. These are all low-maintenance plants. Now, this is one thing we want to avoid, this plant. And we all know what happens to Bradford pears. They've been overplanted back years ago. They got those weak crotches. They break off. God forbid if your car's under one of them. I had to chainsaw cars out from under Bradford pears multiple times in commercial landscaping. You see, if you look up on the upper right, they grow quickly. They have soft wood. You see those narrow angled crotches? Well, that's what ends up happening. Parts of it break off. Also, I've been told that those flowers have an offensive smell to them. And so it's, if you have them, get rid of them. Don't plant them. There's plenty of other nice spring, like crab apples would be an alternative that produce attractive blooms in the spring. All right. There's also some, like the Andorra junipers, are attacked, more likely to be attacked by spider mites than the Pfister junipers in the back and the Parsons at front. So it's best not to plant those because they're a haven for pests. As I mentioned, some plants are more susceptible to certain pests, like the red tips I was just talking about. It's best not to plant those. And also, again, let's think about how large they grow. We talked about spacing. A Leyland cypress tree has a potential to grow 100 feet tall. That's in northern climates. Down here, it'd be more like 50 to 60 feet tall and up to 15 to 20 feet wide. So think about, they're planted just a few feet apart. That's too close, and that's a common problem. They grow into each other, and they get stressed. They shade each other out, compete for nutrients and light, get fungal diseases. So, think about, again, that's the most common example, and just about every planting I've seen has that problem. Think about, now here's another example. Large Leyland cypress tree, again, a poor location for them. They're going to get bigger and bigger and grow into each other around this house. So that's something that shouldn't be planted there. Again, you see how close they're planted. It's not good for the house either. If the area is shaded, it can moisture, and you can get root rot. You can get moisture issues in the house, and even though it is sloped away from the house a little. Also make it more susceptible to burglaries and also the unwanted visitors of insects, spiders, and rodents. Practical turf areas. We talked about this before. Avoid using turf grass areas just to fill up space. A lot of times they receive the highest amount of supplemental irrigation of any plant. Water conservation is your goal, then avoid using irrigated turf grass just to fill space. Now, a lot of times turf grass, like these hybrid Bermudas, can be planted, They need very little supplemental irrigation. My Bermuda grass in the front is not irrigated, and it does well. And of course, in dry spells, it may die. It may go dormant, doesn't really die out, and then it'll come back. Supplemental irrigation can keep it actively growing. But a lot of the other grasses like zoysia and especially tall fescue, you're going to need to apply supplemental irrigation during the growing season. Now this is Mount Vernon Estate. You see all that grass, but it's not irrigated. And this is George Washington's. Matter of fact, they didn't even have lawnmowers invented back in Washington's days. I think maybe they used, I don't know, goats and sheep or something to keep the grass clipped back. Hard to say. I'm sure they found a way to make it work. That looks like tall fescue, but it would be easier to grow it up there in Virginia than down here. Take a look at this right here. This is a simple design during the winter months. This looks like Bermuda or zoysia grass. I'm probably going to lean more towards zoysia grass since it probably is somewhat shaded, and zoysia can handle shade. Just that little spot right there of it. Minimal maintenance, minimal use, so that turf grass area is limited. See this right here? The drought tolerance of turf grasses. The hybrid Bermuda is the most drought tolerant. It's a tough grass, can handle drought, hot, dry conditions, but it doesn't handle shade. That's something you have to keep in mind. Zoysia can handle shade, filtered shade. Centipede grass doesn't do that. Doesn't really like shade. It needs less fertilizer. And also tall fescue. I have that the least because it's a cool season grass. It grows well during the cool weather. Stays green, but during the hot weather conditions, it stresses out and it doesn't do well. So it'll need a lot of supplemental irrigation. Efficient irrigation. Let us use irrigation efficiently. All right, Justin, you have those of you who have automatic irrigation. Don't know if all of you, a lot of you don't. I certainly don't, but a lot of people do. Automated irrigation programs adjust it according to rainfall. Don't just set it and forget it. This is something called a rainfall sensor. And it can be set to once it gets a half inch of rain, the irrigation won't come on. How many of you have seen irrigation running out in the rain? Seen that many times. Pouring down rain and the irrigation's running. Or what about in the cold weather, winter wonderland? This irrigation came on and ice. That's a safety hazard as well. So this is a way to help avoid things like that. Of course, in the winter, the irrigation automatic system should be shut down. Some of them have soil moisture sensors. These here, automatic irrigation systems can get very complicated. And I'll be brutally honest, that is well outside my area of expertise. I have worked with it in the past, but it can get very complicated when you get into all this electrical. And of course, now it's with computerized, it really gets fancy. I always tell people, if you're going to work with irrigation, be prepared to get wet and muddy. Because the times I did, I always got wet and muddy. Now, even if you have a faucet connection, you can time it like this. It connects to a faucet and it'll let you time it. So when you put the water and when not. For the most efficient use, irrigate between 12 a.m. and 9 a.m. to avoid evaporative loss of water. You could maybe go to noon, but no later than that. Avoid light frequent irrigation because it encourages shallow rootings and increase the water demand for the plant. This is what I'm talking about. You need to have maybe once or twice a week water apply enough water, long enough for that water to get deep into the root zone. You want those roots deeply growing into the grass, into the soil. It helps it survive better. It's better able to access soil water and is healthier and sturdier. Now, some plants, you'll see these little water basins, water rings, or sometimes put around. It kind of helps keep water in, especially on dry conditions. Not always used, but sometimes it's used. A little bit of mulch on top. You know, we talked about 1 to 3 inch layer of mulch. That helps reduce water. We'll talk about that a little more in detail. And yes, here are mulches. Mulches have many benefits. We covered this to the landscape design. We'll just kind of go over it in a little bit. Prevents evaporative water loss from the soil. Really, it works pretty good. Prevents soil-borne diseases. Insulate the roots from extreme heat and cold. Reduces weed competition. Yes, it definitely, like we talked about in our weed lecture, reduce weeds. So this is a mulch around a tree, pine straw mulch. Generally, the best mulch is a fine texture, organic, non-matting. Pine straw, pine bark, cypress mulch. Avoid using rock and gravel because they absorb and re-radiate heat around the plant canopy and can be very problematic. So basically what you apply excuse me, 3 to 5 inches on tree and shrubs around the ornamental little flowers, 1 to 3 inches. Now you don't want to, like a trees, I've seen, we call it volcano mulching. Put 2 feet of mulch at the base of a tree, and that's going to cause the smother the root and causes the tree, could cause rot and diseases. So we want to avoid that. Landscape fabrics, like we talked about earlier, help prevent weeds and conserve moisture in the soil and allows for air and water infiltration, which is very helpful, as opposed to the plastics, which don't inhibit air and water infiltration and can keep the soil excessively moist, leading to root rot. Yes, newspapers can even be used. 2 to 3 sheets thick, helps provide an added barrier to moisture loss. You can put the newspaper down and put some pine straw or something on top of it. Don't use glossy magazines or anything like that. Appropriate maintenance, staying on top of that maintenance is very important. Well, fertilization and pruning. You want to try to avoid producing a lot of heavy flushes of vegetated growth. Now in the spring, you're going to get a really pretty good flush of growth. So like some plants you can do some corrective heavy duty pruning like hollies, you can do, and cubas and some of those type of plants. And fertilizing, really spring is the best deal, but fertilizers for your trees and shrubs, you really, some of them don't need to be fertilized every year. Something like roses, you put some 10-10-10 and sprinkle around broadcast around the bottom of the plant, and that'll get it going through the season. Now, something that your roses, you may want to do a little side dressing later, but your most trees and shrubs you don't need. I mean, I have a camellias that are 30 years old, and I never put fertilizer on. I'm pruning, you know, you want to prune appropriately. Target the fertilization of plants that need it. There we go again. Established trees and shrubs may not need it every year. There are slow release forms of nitrogen that release it slowly over time. Low rates of fertilizer. You're going to have your soil tested. Just use what the minimum rate they suggest. Limit fertilizations during dry periods, because that can stress a plant. It can potentially cause fertilizer burn and increase its need for water. So during the hot, dry summer months, you want to avoid putting fertilizer out. Too much nitrogen. You know those three numbers of a fertilizer bag, the NPK ratio, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium. Nitrogen is one that really causes the bulk, more plant growth than the other two. It increases pest problems, like on turf grasses. It makes them more susceptible to certain fungal diseases. So that's why you want to not over fertilize. Increase the growth on top. I know we're trying to get the top to grow, but you know, too much growth at one time and all that fresh, succulent growth requires more water. Also, it makes aphids and other bugs like to chew on it. So that's something you want to take into consideration. Reduces root growth, or the roots aren't growing as fast because the top's growing so much. Increasing pruning requirements. So I have to prune it more often. And the plants, most importantly, the plant's water needs. So having your soil tested and applying the recommended fertilizer amount. So, in a nutshell, we'll talk about you know, the 7 steps of order-wise landscaping, xeriscaping, planning and design, soil analysis, appropriate plant selection, practical turf areas, efficient irrigation, use of mulch, and appropriate maintenance. I am going to go through to come up to see I have a publication, a pretty good size extension publication on xeriscaping that goes really into more details in these areas. I will get that downloaded and try to get that loaded on Google Drive. So if you want more information, and you can access it. This is on Google Drive already. So without further ado, I'll take questions. Lisa, the keeper of the chat box.
All right. Anybody have any questions? You can go ahead and type it into the chat box and I'll read it off for Tim.
Yeah, we got time.
Yeah, nobody has to commute back home today, so it should be got lots of time.
Yeah. You can always email or all that email address if you have questions.
Okay, we got a question.
What?
It says 90% of Earth's water is salt, 2% in ice, 1% in fresh. Where's the other 7%?
It's 97%, I said.
Yeah. 97%.
Yeah. 2% ice and 1%, no, 2% ice and 1% the fresh water that's usable.
Yeah. I got another one, and that question says, what about soaker hoses?
Soaker hoses are good to use because they deliver the water slowly to the area. That's what you're trying to do, you know, to kind of space where you're not just pouring water out like these. A lot of these overhead irrigation systems, soaker hoses, along with like drip irrigations, are really good to use because you're targeting that water to the plant, especially the roots of the plant. That's where you want the water go. It also reduces diseases. Well, you know, you're keeping it off the foliage. Of course, turf grass and low-growing plants, that can be hard to do. But directing that water, yeah, soaker hoses are great.
Okay. Someone said, how long should you let a soaker hose run?
Well, that depends on, you need to see how much it's putting out, see how deep it's penetrated into the soil. So it kind of varies from situation to situation. Water it. Well, you don't want to overwater it, but water it where the water penetrates into the soil. Best to do it earlier in the day if at all possible. But that's what solar hoses are great. And just you have to play with it a little bit because different situations require different time periods.
Okay, lots of questions. Sherry says, remember when irrigating, you need to comply with city and county ordinances. Also, Karen says, you said 10% should be irrigated regularly. What were the other proportions?
Well, we were talking about 10%. Let me check. I can look at my little hang tight for a second. I got this written down here. All right, 10% of the total landscaping should be high water use zones, which are irrigated regularly. 30% zone for moderate water use and watered on demand. 60% should be placed in xeric or low water use zones. That's ideal, but that can vary per situation. Sometimes you may just have less than 5% that's high water use. Or if you're one of those real upscale properties, you can have 20, 30%. Just remember, the water costs money, and it can be. It also you saving money as well as water.
Okay. Another question says, how do we deal with koi ponds or small ponds that increase mosquitoes and may attract other pests in the vicinity?
Well, in results for mosquitoes, that's the main one. What I would recommend is you use those mosquito dunks or mosquito briquettes that you put in there. It won't hurt the fish, but it will kill the mosquito larvae. It's a bacteria that's related to the subspecies of the Bacillus thuringiensis or BT that's used for caterpillar pests. It does a good job. We call it a larvicide. And about other pests, the biggest thing I'd worry if I had a koi pond are those whooping cranes coming down and feasting on the fish. So you might want to have some like a mesh netting or something above to keep that from happening. I think that happened to Robert Brannon one time in his koi pond.
Let me add in there that on a koi pond, if it depends on if you're using one that you added a liner and did yourself, or if you're using one of those plastic pre-made ones, you can add in large flagstone and put them on pots to give some type of overhead cover for the fish. And you can also use mosquito fish or gambusia in there to help with mosquito larvae.
I agree. That's, surely you can do that. There's multiple ways to go about it. I kind of wouldn't mind having a koi pond, but don't have anywhere to put it. That's the problem.
All right. What was the name of the white tree that the branches break if it break and was in the slide? I'm thinking Bradford pear.
Well, that's one, but the other one I was mentioning was you're probably thinking about river birches. Those things they're very, very attractive trees with the exfoliating bark, but they drop leaves and branches on a continual basis, real messy. So you just want to keep that, you take that in consideration. Like, don't put that over a driveway or walkway.
Okay.
I see that all over the place. Entrances to building, there's a big river birch, and all the leaves go into the building.
Okay. Says you mentioned spirea is a good shade plant and a sun plant. Which is correct, or are both?
I would say that's more of a sun plant.
Okay. Next one, when is the best time to fertilize azaleas?
I'd say right as they're coming out of in the early spring. I kind of had a rule of thumb right after they bloom. That's a good time. That's when I fertilize mine.
Okay.
Use one of those azalea rhododendron fertilizers that helps acidify the soil.
All right. Marie says
It's also the best
Oh,
time to prune them right after they finish blooming in the spring. 8 questions about encore azaleas because they bloom in the spring and the fall. Prune them after they bloom in the spring. Next question, Lisa.
okay. Marie says she thinks she over fertilized some mondo grass. She says she used 10-10-10 that was being put into another area based on a soil test, and now it looks yellow and burned. Is there any hope for it?
Well, there may a good chance there will be. I'd say keep that watered during dry spells and see how it comes back. Mondo grass doesn't need a lot of fertilizer because it's a slow growing grass. It's very slow growing. That's why many years ago when I was kind of ignorant when I was working for the landscape company and didn't know that much, I mowed some mondo grass back and I said, hey, you don't do that because it grows so slowly. So it does grow slowly, but yeah, there's hope there.
Okay.
Maybe
What's
they need to replace some plants that don't come back, but
okay?
how it works.
All right. Next question. What is your point of view on rubber mulch? You said organic is best. Does rubber mulch absorb heat like gravel?
Yes, it does. I do not like rubber mulch. Now if you got like walkways or stuff like that, you're fine. But no, you don't want to use that around plants. I know I don't know if they still do it. A lot of these quick trips around here, they use rubber pine straw, which I thought looked ridiculous. But you know how it goes. Each to his own.
Okay. Next question. About rainwater collection. In Metro Atlanta, is it legal across the board or only during a certain amount, or can you only have a certain amount at a time? And since mosquitoes are a big issue, again, what are good preventative measures to keeping the water for use in the garden, but not making it a nesting site for mosquitoes?
All right. Well, first of all, I have, unless there's, I haven't heard anything to the contrary. Yeah, you can use rainwater. That's actually they're even, some places. I know at the University of Georgia, the Griffin campus, are doing that. They're collecting rainwaters in cisterns underground. Yes, it definitely can be used. Now, a question about the mosquitoes, using the mosquito brick or the mosquito dumps, or put some type of netting over it to keep them out, to something like some screen to keep them from actually going in there. Now, one thing to note that there's a lot of bacteria stuff coming off the rooftop, so don't water your vegetable plants with those rain buckets. However, the rainwater that's been collected in the barrels, but you can water your ornamental plants. That's no problem at all.
Okay. Next question. How much water do crepe myrtles need when getting established? Should you use a water bag or no?
All right. Well, they need to have especially if you're putting them in the spring or summer. Yeah, they'll need to have water to keep before as they're getting established. Don't let them dry out. Those bags. Now you may have seen those big green bags. They're called gator bags. I don't know how that got their name. Maybe Florida, University of Florida invented. But anyhow, gator bags, and they work great. That slow trickle irrigation. But a lot of these plants, trees and shrubs, it's really best to put them in the fall and early winter because they're not under as much stress and they can get more established. However, you can realistically plant them any time of the year. But just remember, if it's during the warm weather, hot weather, you'll have to make sure it gets that supplemental irrigation and make sure you got some mulch. That helps. Good question,
Okay.
folks. Carry on.
Next question. My neighbor just applied an oak bark mulch. He said a hardwood mulch is best for a variety of reasons, beating pine bark, pine nuggets, and pine straw. He said it had the water. He said it had the water wise and weed control benefits you discussed, but also provided many more nutrients to the soil. Is this true?
Well, the only thing I can say is that as it breaks down, it may release some nutrients because we're talking about is mulch. It may release a little nutrients, but it's not that much. I don't really see any, that where that's an advantage of wood chips. No.
Okay. How many years before a rhododendron blooms?
That depends on the rhododendron. You're talking about those catawba, big, those round the ones with those ball-shaped flowers, 3, 4 years maybe. It just depends on the particular variety of rhododendron. If it's in the appropriate needs semi-shade, moist, organic soil, you know, all those factors need and those are a lot of factors come into play. But if there's some cases you can buy them where they're already blooming and planting. You get the first year. Other times it may take 2 or 3 years. It just depends.
Okay. I have azaleas that are very overgrown, 20 years, never been pruned. If I cut them back hard after they bloom this year, will they come back? Can you
Yep.
give me some guidelines on how far to cut back?
All right, how tall are the azaleas?
It doesn't say here.
Well, yeah, I'd say maybe you could take them down halfway and
She says 4 feet.
4 feet. Oh, well, that's not that bad. She can take them down a couple of feet. Right now is a good time to do it when it's finished. Do get some of that fertilizer like some 1010 to help them encourage them to grow some. Because they to get the flusher growth out a little bit because that's what's appropriate. And then they'll take off. You got to prune your azaleas right after they bloom, up until around the beginning of July, because if you prune later, you're gonna cut your blossoms off for next year.
Okay. Next question I have. Oops, lots of questions here. Hang on. I have a lot of moss and I had a soil test done. Can I rake that moss away and put down lime and then put down zoysia seed now?
Well, you had the soil test done. Lime, if it's acidic, that does encourage moss to grow. And lime would help, but also moss shade will make it grow. Compacted, poorly drained soils. So she needs to check her soil. You need to check your soil. See if it's compacted. Check the drainage. As long as you can handle some filtered shade. So yeah, let's rake that moss out and check those conditions before you put the seed down.
Okay. Let's see. FYI, legal use of rain barrels varies by state. Oh, I didn't know this. They are illegal in the whole state of Colorado because apparently no water source.
Weird, but they're not illegal around here, and that's ridiculous. But
a little bit of trivia for trivia night.
Well, you know how it is. Different states are doing things differently. Like with opening the states up with all this coronavirus, everybody's wanting to do different things, and that creates issues. But especially with the water, now you run into that. So, let's say if you move like to Colorado or someplace like that, you might want to check into that. But around here, you're fine.
Okay. Next question. You keep mentioning hybrid Bermuda, but is there a specific common name for a seed that is best, or do you just ask for hybrid Bermuda?
All right. Well, I'll tell you, common Bermuda. There's common Bermuda and hybrid Bermuda. Common Bermuda is can be used by seed. That's the type that's seeded. Now, hybrid, it grows. It doesn't have quite some of the. It's a little. It grows good and it grows fast, but it doesn't have some of the more attractive characteristics of a hybrid. The hybrid Bermuda grasses, they've been hybridized through special breeding. They're sterile. You can't seed those. They're vegetative propagated vegetatively, meaning you have to put them out of sod, plugs, or sprigs.
Okay. Next question, and this is the last one I have unless somebody else wants to type something in. We have a pond with a stream and a waterfall. Rainwater from the roof is directed into the pond basin, although we also have to add water from our house water source. We also use a pond basin as a source to irrigate our tomatoes. What kind of chemicals might come from the rain falling on the roof?
Well, you know, you got shingles and stuff up there. Also, you got to worry about birds doing their business up there and getting bacteria. I'm a little putting that into an ornamental fish pond. I'm a little concerned about that because that could possibly cause some harm to the fish. So I would not recommend that. I mean, if the water's flowing across the grass and it's a pond and it kind of filters out, it'd be a little bit, you'd be a lot better, you know, coming out of a downspout. But directly off the roof, I don't like that. No, I recommend it.
Okay. Next question. You mentioned lime encourages moss to grow. If I want the moss in my yard to take over, do you recommend adding lime?
Lime, that's the opposite. Lime discourages moss to grow. Moss needs acidic soil, where the lime decreases acidity. So if you want moss to grow, which is nothing wrong with that, it's very low maintenance. Get something to acidify the soil, like sulfur or a soil acidifier type of something that has sulfate in it.
Also, I just on that thread, if somebody wants moss to take over, can you explain like a moss milkshake that would help that?
A moss milkshake? I don't know, really not familiar with what they're talking about. A moss milkshake. You mean
That's
like
me. That was me throwing that in there, just propagation. You basically take moss and some nutrients and you blend it up, and then you can use it to kind of put around your yard wherever you're wanting it to move, and it helps.
That's perfectly all right to try that. I can't say it'll work everywhere, but you can give it a try. Yeah.
Sometimes people will do that in between flagstones.
That's good. That's that's very attractive. I encourage that.
So that's the last question that I have, unless somebody else has something they want to quickly type in. And these presentations from today, those will be sent out to your coordinators, and you should have access to those recorded presentations probably by tomorrow, I'm guessing.
Yeah, I practiced on some of the presentations yesterday and recorded them, but I'm going to delete them and put the ones from today. I do appreciate y'all asked some excellent questions. I love this question answer. These are some really good questions. Next week we're going to go on invasive species in the morning. Then in the afternoon, Kim Fritz is going to do a presentation on leadership and communication. And then Renee Lim is going to do a little presentation. We'll talk on using how you record your hours, MG log. And then, was it May 6th, we're going to start, that's when the exam will be opened up, final exam.
Okay.
Again, I wish I really was trying to get this other speaker to do the landscape design and water conservation, but he wasn't really available. And just in the trying to get this class completed with everything that's going on, we just have to wing it this way. And I know it's rough on everybody, but just bear with us. Y'all all doing great. Thank you for your patience and understanding, and reach out to us if we can help you answer questions or do anything for you. Just contact us. And everybody stay safe, and I wish you all well.
Okay. You as well, Tim. Thank you to you.
Yeah. And you got the presentations uploaded into Google Drive already,
They're uploaded in Google Drive, and I'll try to find that publication on xeriscaping and put that in there as well. And I'll get the invasive ones up there sometime shortly as well.
Thanks, Tim. It was great.
All right, well, y'all have a great weekend and enjoy this pretty weather.